The silence in a marriage is often louder than the arguments, especially at 3 a.m. when you are the only one awake, staring at a ceiling that cost more than your father's entire house. You watch the person you vowed to love forever, sleeping peacefully beside you, their phone face down on the nightstand, hiding a digital life that has nothing to do with you. It starts with a feeling, a cold draft in a sealed room, and ends with a manila envelope that weighs no more than a few ounces but is heavy enough to crush a life. The truth isn't always what sets you free. Sometimes it's what locks you in a cage of your own making. If you find yourself drawn to the jagged edges of human relationships and the dark secrets hidden behind suburban doors, I invite you to stay. There are many more layers to peel back, and I'd love for you to walk this path with me. The numbers on the digital clock change with a silent, mocking indifference. 3:14 a.m. Lucas Vance lay perfectly still, his body rigid beneath the 800 thread count Egyptian cotton sheets. Beside him, Camille breathed in a soft, rhythmic cadence. It was a sound that used to comfort him, a metronome for his own rest. Now it sounded like a lie. He turned his head slowly, the friction of his cheek against the pillow sounding like sandpaper in the dead silence of the room. Camille was facing away from him, the curve of her shoulder illuminated by the ghostly blue ambient light of the smart home system. She looked peaceful, innocent. That was the part that made the bile rise in Lucas's throat, her ability to sleep. It had been 4 days since he saw the message. It hadn't been a text on her phone. She was too careful for that. It had been a notification syncing to the family iPad in the kitchen, a device they barely used, usually reserved for recipes or controlling the Sonos speakers. He had been drinking water, standing in the dark at midnight, when the screen lit up. Unknown. He doesn't suspect a thing. See you Friday. He hadn't unlocked it. He hadn't confronted her. He had just stood there, the cold glass of the tumbler sweating in his hand, watching the screen fade back to black. Since that moment, sleep had become a foreign country he was exiled from. Lucas threw the covers off, the sudden movement violent in the stillness. Camille stirred slightly, murmuring something unintelligible, before settling back into the deep sleep of the guiltless, or the sociopathic. He walked out of the master suite, his bare feet making no sound on the polished concrete floors of the hallway. The house, a modern architectural statement perched on the cliffs of Tiburon, overlooking the bay, felt like a museum tonight, cold, sterile, empty. Down in the kitchen, the hum of the sub-zero refrigerator was the only noise. Lucas poured himself a scotch, neat. His hands were shaking. Not much, just a tremor in the fingers. He was the CFO of a venture capital firm that managed $3 billion in assets. He made decisions that dissolved companies and fired thousands of people without blinking. But this unseen, amorphous threat in his own home was dismantling him cell by cell. He paced the length of the living room, staring out at the San Francisco skyline across the water. Somewhere out there, in the grid of lights, was the person she was meeting. Who is he? The question was a parasite eating his brain. Was it the architect they hired for the Sonoma property? Was it one of the hungry young artists she represented at the gallery? Or was it someone from his own circle, a friend who shook his hand at the club and laughed at his jokes? He took a sip of the scotch, the burn grounding him. He had checked her location history, but it was clean. Too clean. He had checked the credit card statements. Nothing unusual, just the standard Pilates memberships and Whole Foods runs. She was smart. He had always loved that about her. Now her. Intelligence was a weapon. The sound of a car engine breaking the silence of the cul-de-sac made him freeze. It was early, the gray light of dawn just beginning to bleed into the sky. A delivery truck. Lucas frowned. He set the glass down and moved to the front entryway. Through the frosted glass panel beside the massive oak door, he saw a figure in a nondescript uniform walk up the driveway. This wasn't Amazon. This wasn't FedEx. This was the courier he had paid $5,000 to prioritize. He opened the door before the man could ring the bell. The morning air was biting, smelling of eucalyptus and sea salt. The courier, a tired-looking man with a clipboard, didn't make eye contact. He just held out a thick, rigid manila envelope. "Sign here, Mr. Vance." Lucas scrawled his signature, the pen feeling heavy in his hand. He took the envelope. It had a tangible weight to it. He stepped back inside and closed the door, leaning his back against the wood. The house was still silent. Upstairs, Camille was likely rolling over, enjoying the last hour of rest before her alarm went off for yoga. Lucas looked down at the envelope. His name was typed on the front in a generic sans serif font. Inside this packet was the summary of the last 72 hours of his wife's life. Every movement, every meeting, every coffee shop stop. The truth was in his hands, and suddenly the exhaustion vanished, replaced by a cold, terrifying adrenaline. He didn't know if he was about to save his life or destroy it. Lucas didn't open the envelope. The sound of footsteps on the floating staircase above him had frozen his blood. With a reflex born of panic, he had shoved the thick packet into the bottom drawer of the kitchen island, beneath a stack of linen napkins, just seconds before Camille appeared in the doorway. She was wearing a silk robe, her hair tousled, looking soft and warm, a stark contrast to the cold, hard knot of paper now sitting in the drawer. "Who was at the door so early?" she asked, yawning, reaching for the coffee machine. "Wrong address," Lucas lied. The lie tasted like copper in his mouth. "Some courier looking for the neighbors." She didn't press. She didn't look at him with suspicion. She just hummed, a low melodic sound, and pressed the button for a double espresso. That was the terrifying part. If she was lying, she was a prodigy. 12 hours later, the silence of the kitchen was replaced by the deafening roar of polite society. The De Young Museum had been transformed into a cavern of gold light and crystal. Waiters in white jackets moved like ghosts through the crowd, carrying trays of champagne. The air smelled of expensive perfume and ambition. Lucas stood near a pillar, one hand in the pocket of his tuxedo, the other gripping a glass of sparkling water. Camille was 10 feet away holding court. She was wearing a backless emerald gown that clung to her frame like liquid. She laughed at something a bearded man said. Andrew, a tech CEO Lucas had known for years. Andrew leaned in close, whispering something near her ear. Camille's hand came up, resting lightly, briefly on Andrew's forearm. It was a social gesture. It meant nothing. In this world, touching was currency. It bought intimacy and favor. But to Lucas, observing through the lens of 4 sleepless nights, the touch looked like a confession. Is it him? Lucas thought, his eyes narrowing. Is Andrew the one? She looks stunning tonight, Lucas, a voice said beside him. Lucas turned. It was Eleanor, a senior partner at his firm. She was watching Camille with a mix of admiration and calculation. Yes, Lucas said, his voice flat. She does. You two are the anchor, Eleanor continued, taking a sip of her drink. With the IPO launching next month, stability is key. Investors love a man with a solid home life. It suggests discipline. Discipline. Lucas felt a laugh bubbling up. In his chest, hysterical and jagged. If Eleanor knew that a dossier of surveillance photos was currently sitting beneath a stack of napkins in his kitchen, the IPO would be dead in the water by morning. Excuse me, Lucas muttered. He moved toward his wife. He needed to be close to her. He needed to see if she flinched when he touched her. As he approached, Camille turned, sensing his presence. Her smile didn't waver. It widened. It was the smile she wore for magazine shoots. There he is, she said, slipping her arm through his. Her skin was cool against his wrist. I was just telling Andrew about the Napa trip. The Napa trip, Lucas repeated. He looked at Andrew. The man's eyes were friendly, open. Too open? I didn't know we were planning a trip. Ideally next month, Camille said smoothly, tightening her grip on his arm ever so slightly. A warning or affection? We need a break, don't we, darling? You've been working so late recently. The accusation was subtle, buried under layers of concern. You've been working late. It was a deflection. She was rewriting the narrative in real time, painting him as the absent husband to justify whatever she was doing in the shadows. I have been, Lucas said, locking eyes with her. He searched her pupils for a flicker of guilt, a tremor of fear. There was nothing, just the deep, calm ocean of her eyes. But I'm making time now. I'm going to be paying very close attention to everything from now on. The smile on Camille's face stiffened. just for a fraction of a second. It was microscopic, a tiny tension at the corner of her mouth. "Good," she whispered, leaning in to kiss his cheek. The scent of her jasmine perfume filled his lungs, sickeningly sweet. "I miss you, Lucas." She pulled away and turned back to the circle, radiant and untouchable. Lucas stood there, feeling the phantom pressure of her lips on his skin. He realized then that he wasn't just looking for a lover. He was looking for an enemy who knew him better than he knew himself. The envelope in the drawer wasn't just a report. It was the only thing in the world that wasn't lying to him, and he couldn't wait to get back to it. The gala was over, but the adrenaline was still poisoning his blood. Camille had gone straight to bed, claiming a migraine, a convenient excuse that allowed her to lock the bathroom door and perhaps send one final message before sleep took her. Lucas didn't follow her upstairs. Instead, he retreated to his study on the ground floor, a glass-walled sanctuary of dark walnut and leather that felt more like a bunker than a workspace. He had the envelope from the morning courier on his desk. He had ripped it open 5 minutes ago. The contents were underwhelming, which made them terrifying. The report from the preliminary surveillance was a map of holes. Subject entered the Fairmont parking garage at 2:15 p.m. Subject exited at 4:45 p.m. 2.5 hours the second on release. Investigator's note was scribbled in the margin. Lost visual. She changed vehicles or stayed in the garage. No signal. She hadn't been shopping. She hadn't been at the gallery. She had simply ceased to exist for 150 minutes. Lucas stared at the photo of her car, a silver Porsche Cayenne, sitting innocently in the shadows of the concrete structure. If the physical world couldn't tell him where she was, the digital world would. He sat down at his triple monitor setup and woke the system. The blue light washed over his face, highlighting the exhaustion etched under his eyes. He wasn't just a husband anymore. He was an auditor. He logged into the Vance family cloud. It was a shared ecosystem they had set up years ago for convenience. Photos, contacts, location sharing. Camille, for all her sophistication, was complacent with technology. She assumed that because her phone was locked, her secrets were safe. She forgot that the cloud remembered everything. Lucas didn't look for active messages. He knew she would delete those. He looked for the metadata. He pulled up the location history logs. A map of the Bay Area appeared, covered in red dots tracking her movements over the last month. He filtered for the dates corresponding to his sleepless nights. Tuesday, November 14th. The red line traced her path from the house to the gallery in Union Square. Then at 1:00 p.m., the line stopped. The data simply ended. It resumed at 4:30 p.m., back at the gallery. Thursday, November 16th. Another blackout, this time for 3 hours. He opened her backup frequency logs. His breath hitched. The automatic iCloud backup, which usually ran every night while she charged her phone, had been manually disabled for the last 3 weeks. She was going dark, systematically. Lucas felt a cold sweat prickle on his neck. This wasn't a crime of passion. This wasn't a drunken mistake after a gallery opening. This was tradecraft. This was the behavior of someone running an operation. He navigated to the deleted items folder in her synchronized notes app. It was empty. He went to the browser history. Cleared. He sat back, the leather chair groaning under his weight. The cleanliness of the data was the smoking gun. If she were innocent, there would be clutter. Searches for restaurants, random articles, shopping links. But there was nothing. She had scrubbed the timeline. He stared at the screen, his mind racing. To maintain this level of secrecy, she needed help. She needed a separate channel of communication. He clicked on the bill for their cellular provider. He scanned the data usage. There were no unusual calls on her primary line, but then he noticed a spike in data tethering. She was using her phone as a hotspot, connecting a second device, a burner phone, a tablet he didn't know about. Lucas closed his eyes, rubbing his temples. The betrayal was mutating. It wasn't just infidelity, it felt like corporate espionage. She was managing 2 lives, partitioning them with a firewall he couldn't breach from the outside. He needed to get closer. He needed to stop looking at the shadows on the wall and find the object casting them. He reached for his phone and dialed the number on the PI's letterhead. It was 2 a.m., but men in that line of work didn't sleep. "This is Vance. Lucas said into the dark room. The surveillance isn't enough. I need you to go deeper, and I want to meet, in person. He hung up. The silence of the house returned, heavier than before. Upstairs, his wife was sleeping, dreaming in a code he couldn't crack. But he was done guessing. He was ready to pay whatever price the truth demanded. The GPS led him off the highway and into the industrial arteries of West Oakland. The fog here didn't look romantic like it did in Marin. It looked like exhaust fumes trapped under a low ceiling. Lucas parked his Tesla 3 blocks away from the location, tucked between a chain-link fence and a dumpster. He felt ridiculous. He was wearing a cashmere sweater that cost more than the Honda Civic parked next to him. He checked his reflection in the rearview mirror. He looked tired, yes, but he also looked like exactly what he was. A wealthy man trying to buy his way out of pain. The Kingfish pub was a narrow shoebox of a building that looked like it had been dropped from the sky into the middle of the pavement. The neon sign buzzed with a dying insect sound. Lucas pushed the door open. The smell hit him first. Stale beer, bleach, and decades of damp wood. It was 8:00 p.m., but inside time seemed to be suspended in a perpetual twilight. He saw the man in the back booth. Garrick didn't look like a detective from a noir film. He looked like a retired linebacker who had spent too much time in the sun. He was wearing a faded windbreaker and reading a newspaper on his phone. There was a half-eaten basket of fries on the table. Lucas slid into the booth opposite him. The vinyl squeaked. "You look out of place, Mr. Vance," Garrick said without looking up. His voice was gravel shifting in a mixer. "I didn't come here for fashion advice," Lucas replied, keeping his voice low. He placed a thick envelope on the table. It wasn't the surveillance report. This one contained cash. $5,000 in hundreds. Untraceable. Garrick finally looked up. His eyes were small, dark, and devoid of judgment. He had seen 1,000 husbands like Lucas, rich, angry, and terrified of being the last to know. "You said on the phone she's ghosting," Garrick said, ignoring the envelope for a moment, disappearing from the grid. 2 to 3 hours at a time, Lucas confirmed. No digital footprint, no credit card usage. She's meeting someone, and she's good at hiding it. Garrick nodded slowly, picking up a fry. The smart ones are always the hardest. If she's turning off her phone, she's not. Just cheating. She's planning. People in love make mistakes. People on a mission don't. The words chilled Lucas. On a mission. "I need to know who he is," Lucas said, his hand resting on the envelope. "I don't care about the cost. I want a name. I want photos. I want to know where they go when the GPS stops." Garrick wiped his hands on a napkin and finally reached for the money. He didn't count it. He just slid it into his jacket pocket in one fluid motion. "Standard surveillance won't work if she's making the drop," Garrick said. "I'll need to get physical. Tracker on the wheel well of the Porsche, long-range lenses. I might need to clone her key fob if she's switching cars." "Do whatever you have to do," Lucas said. The sentence felt heavy, final. He was authorizing a violation of his wife's privacy that would be illegal in any court. But the law felt irrelevant now. The law didn't wake up at 3 a.m. wondering if his life was a lie. "One thing," Garrick said, leaning forward. The shift in his posture was subtle, but threatening. "You need to stay calm. When I find this guy, you don't go cowboy. You don't confront her until I give you the full package. You blow the cover, and she goes deeper underground. You understand?" "I understand," Lucas lied. He didn't know if he could hold it in. "Go home," Garrick said, dismissing him. "Act normal. Buy her flowers. Ask her about her day. Be the husband she thinks is an idiot. I'll be in touch when the package is ready." Lucas stood up. He felt lighter but also dirtier. He walked out of the bar, back into the Oakland mist. The cool air felt good on his face. He had pulled the trigger. Now all he had to do was wait for the bullet to land. For 3 days, Lucas had followed Garrick's instructions to the letter. He had bought lilies, Camille's favorite, and placed them on the dining table. He had asked about her day with a smile that felt like it was stapled onto his face. He had touched her shoulder as she walked past him in the kitchen, feeling the warmth of her skin and wondering if another man's hands had been there hours before. Every time her phone buzzed, his heart hammered against his ribs. Every time she left the house, He had to physically restrain himself from following her. Then the text came. It was 4:45 p.m. on a Tuesday. The fog was rolling in off the bay, thick and gray, erasing the Golden Gate Bridge from the horizon. Lucas was in his home office, pretending to review a term sheet for a Series B funding round. His phone vibrated on the desk. Unknown number. Check the box. It's done. Lucas stared at the screen until it went dark. The house was quiet. Camille was at a board meeting for the SMOMA charity gala, or at least that was the entry on the shared calendar. Lucas stood up. His legs felt heavy, like he was walking through water. He walked to the front door, opened it, and stepped out into the cool, damp air. The driveway was empty. He walked to the sleek, architectural mailbox at the end of the path. Inside, there was a single item. It wasn't a standard envelope. It was a thick, padded courier pack, sealed with heavy tape. No return address, just his name, handwritten in black marker. Lucas took it. It was heavier than he expected. It felt like it contained a brick. He walked back into the house, locking the front door behind him. The sound of the deadbolt sliding home echoed through the high ceilings of the foyer. It sounded like the door of a cell closing. He carried the package into the kitchen and placed it on the white marble island. The contrast was stark, the ugly brown packaging against the pristine, million-dollar surface. He didn't open it immediately. He couldn't. He walked to the wet bar and poured a glass of water, but he didn't drink it. He just gripped the glass, the condensation cooling his palms. He looked at the envelope from across the room. Inside that package was the face of the man who was destroying his marriage. Inside were the dates, the times, the locations, the hotel rooms, the restaurants, the specific moments where Camille had looked into someone else's eyes and lied to Lucas by omission. What if it's someone I know? The thought made his stomach turn. If it was Andrew or a colleague or a friend, the humiliation would be public. It would be a story told over cocktails at the club for years. But worse than the humiliation was the loss. Lucas realized, standing there in the silence of his perfect house, that he still loved her. Despite the suspicion, despite the rage, the pathetic truth was that he didn't want to lose her. He wanted to wake up and find out this was all a misunderstanding. He wanted the envelope to be empty. But the envelope wasn't empty. It was thick with evidence. He walked back to the island. He reached into the drawer and pulled out a silver letter opener. The metal was cold. He looked at the clock on the oven. 5:15 p.m. Camille wouldn't be home for another 2 hours. He had time. He had time to see the wreckage before the crash actually happened. Lucas took a deep breath, the air shuddering in his lungs. He pinned the corner of the package down with his left hand and slid the blade under the tape with his right. The sound of the tearing paper was the loudest thing in the world. He reached inside and pulled out a stack of 80810 photographs and a bound dossier. He laid them face down on the marble. He closed his eyes for a second, a silent prayer to a God he didn't believe in, begging for it to be something forgivable. Then he turned the first photograph over. Lucas stared at the photograph, his brain refusing to process the visual data. He had expected to see a stranger, a handsome younger man with a jawline carved from granite, perhaps an artist from Camille's gallery or a rival venture capitalist. He had prepared himself for the sting of sexual inadequacy, but the man in the grainy telephoto shot was neither a stranger nor a rival. It was Julian. Lucas dropped the photo on the marble counter as if it were burning hot. He stepped back, his breath catching in a ragged gasp. Julian, his younger brother, the addict he had cut off 5 years ago. The liability he had erased from his life after the third rehab stint and the stolen Rolex incident. He grabbed the stack of photos and spread them out frantically, his hands shaking so hard he knocked over the glass of water. It shattered, shards of crystal skittering across the floor, but he didn't look down. Photo 2, Camille and Julian sitting on a park bench near the Presidio. Photo 3, Camille handing Julian a thick envelope, not unlike the one Lucas had just opened. Photo 4, Julian laughing, looking healthier than Lucas remembered. He wasn't the emaciated junkie anymore. He looked sharp, focused, dangerous. No, Lucas whispered to the empty room. Not him. Anyone but him. The nausea hit him in a wave. The idea of his wife, His elegant, sophisticated Camille, touching Julian, letting him into her bed, was a level of depravity Lucas couldn't fathom. It was incestuous, dirty, a deliberate desecration of everything Lucas had built. But as he looked closer, the narrative in his head began to fracture. He picked up a photo taken inside a diner. The lens had captured them through the window. They weren't holding hands. They weren't leaning in with the soft, glazed eyes of lovers. There was no wine on the table. There were papers, stacks of them, spreadsheets, legal documents with blue backers. Lucas narrowed his eyes. He grabbed the magnifying glass he kept in the junk drawer and held it over the image. The resolution was high enough to make out the headers on the documents: Vance Capital Partners, Q for Liquidation Strategy, Cayman Islands Holdings, Transfer Protocol. Lucas felt the blood drain from his face, leaving him cold and dizzy. He dropped the magnifying glass. He reached for the bound dossier, the written report Garrick had compiled. He flipped past the surveillance logs to the section titled Audio Transcript Directional Mic Recording. Date 11/18. He read the words on the page, hearing them in his head in Camille's voice. Camille. He's distracted with the IPO. He's not checking the secondary accounts. We have a window of about 10 days before the auditors come in. Julian. Are you sure the signature authority is valid? Camille. I've been practicing it for 3 years, Julian. It's valid. Once the transfer hits the shell company, we file for divorce. By the time the assets are frozen, the money will be in Zurich. He'll be left with the house and the debt. Julian. He's going to destroy you when he finds out. Camille. He destroyed me a long time ago. He just didn't notice. Lucas lowered the paper. The silence in the kitchen was absolute, but inside his head the world was screaming. It wasn't an affair. It was a heist. She wasn't sleeping with his brother. She had recruited him. She had weaponized the one person in the world who hated Lucas as much as she apparently did. All the late nights, the secret messages, the lost time. She wasn't hiding a lover. She was building an exit strategy. She was planning to bankrupt him. The realization washed over him, colder than the ocean. Infidelity was a crime of passion, a weakness of the flesh. This was an execution. She had been smiling at him over dinner, letting him kiss her goodbye, all while plotting to strip him of everything he owned. Lucas looked at the shattered glass on the floor. He felt a strange, icy calm settle over him. The panic was gone. The jealousy was gone. What remained was the clarity of a man who finally understood the rules of the game he was playing. He heard the sound of the garage door opening, the hum of the Porsche engine. She was home. Lucas didn't scramble to hide the photos. He didn't sweep up the glass. He stood there leaning against the island, the evidence spread out like a royal flush, waiting for her to walk through the door. The door from the garage opened with a heavy pneumatic hiss. Camille walked in, carrying her Bottega Veneta tote and a sleek yoga mat. She was humming a tune, something light and pop-oriented, completely at odds with the execution ground she was stepping onto. She kicked off her heels near the mudroom bench. "Lucas," she called out. "I'm back. The traffic on the bridge was a nightmare. I hope you didn't wait to..." She stopped. She was standing in the archway of the kitchen. She saw the shattered crystal on the floor first. Then her eyes lifted to the marble island. She saw the spread of glossy photographs. She saw the transcripts. And finally, she saw Lucas. He was leaning against the counter, arms crossed, watching her with the dead eyes of a shark. The silence that stretched between them lasted 5 seconds, but it felt like a lifetime. In a cheaper story, she would have gasped, dropped her bag, or rushed to cover the photos. Camille did none of those things. She stood perfectly still. Her face went blank, the polite social smile sliding off like a mask unhooked from behind her ears. She looked at the photo of Julian, then back at Lucas. "I told him you were too smart for the timeline," she said. Her voice was steady, terrifyingly steady. "I told him we needed to move the assets last week." Lucas felt a fresh crack in his chest. No denial, no tears, just a logistical critique of her failed heist. "That's it?" Lucas asked, his voice rasping. "That's your reaction? You're plotting with my junkie brother to embezzle millions from me, and you're worried about the timeline?" Camille walked further into the room. She placed her bag on a chair and walked right up to the island, looking down at the one evidence of her betrayal. He's not a junkie anymore, Lucas. He's been clean for 2 years. But you wouldn't know that, would you? You haven't answered his calls since 2021. He's a thief, Lucas spat, and apparently so are you. I'm a wife who got tired of being a prop, Camille said, looking up at him. Her eyes were dry. Look at this house, Lucas. It's a showroom. Look at me. I'm an accessory. You don't have a partner. You have a curator for your lifestyle. You park me at galas, you have me entertain your investors, and then you go back to your laptop. I gave you everything, Lucas shouted, the control finally slipping. This house, the gallery, the life. You bought me thing, she cut him off, her voice slicing through his anger like a scalpel. You bought my silence. You bought my compliance. But you were never here. You were always looking at the next deal, the next IPO. I was just another asset in your portfolio, something to appreciate in value while you ignored it. Lucas laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. So you decided to sleep with Julian? To punish me? I didn't sleep with him, Camille said, looking at him with genuine pity. That's the saddest part, Lucas. You think everything is about sex. You think the only way a woman can hurt you is with her body. She tapped the transcript with a manicured fingernail. This wasn't about lust. It was about business. I chose Julian because he was the only other person on earth who knew what it felt like to be discarded by you once you didn't need him anymore. The words hit Lucas harder than a physical blow. She hadn't betrayed him for love. She had betrayed him for revenge. She had weaponized his own family against him because he had made her feel invisible. You're done, Lucas whispered. You get nothing. I'll bury you in court. I'll make sure you never work in the art world again. Camille shrugged. It was a gesture of supreme exhaustion. Do what you want. Freeze the accounts. Sue me. I don't care. She turned around and walked toward the stairs. Where are you going? Lucas demanded. To pack a bag, she said, not looking back. I'd rather sleep in a motel tonight than spend one more minute in this glass box with you. Lucas stood alone in the kitchen, surrounded by the photos of his brother and the wreckage of his marriage. He had won. He had caught her. He had the evidence to destroy her. So why did he feel like the one who had lost everything? The lawyers called it a clean break. In the high-stakes world of California divorce law, it was considered a masterclass in asset protection. Lucas's legal team, armed with a dossier of evidence and the threat of a fraud indictment against Julian, had forced a settlement that left his fortune virtually untouched. Camille had walked away with a modest sum, enough to start over, but nowhere near the millions she had tried to siphon off. Julian had vanished, back into the underworld of the East Coast, silenced by a non-disclosure agreement and the threat of prison time. Lucas had won. By every metric his world respected, he was the victor. 6 months later, the house in Tiburon was quieter than it had ever been. Lucas stood on the balcony of the master bedroom, holding a glass of scotch. The fog was heavy tonight, a thick white blanket that swallowed the lights of the Golden Gate Bridge, leaving him staring into a void. Inside, the house was perfect. He had hired an interior designer to erase the traces of Camille. The art she had chosen was gone, replaced by stark, abstract pieces that looked good in architectural magazines, but made him feel nothing. The closet where her clothes used to hang was now filled with his own bespoke suits, spaced evenly, perfectly organized. There was no one to conspire against him now. No one to whisper in the corners. No one to check his bank accounts. He was safe. He took a sip of the drink. It tasted expensive and numb. Earlier that day, the IPO for his firm had launched. The stock had surged 20% at the opening bell. He was, on paper, significantly richer than he had been the night he found the text message on the iPad. He had received 100 texts of congratulations. He had replied to none of them. He turned and walked back into the bedroom. The bed was made with military precision. He sat on the edge of the mattress and looked at the nightstand. The iPad was still there. He hadn't turned it on in months. He didn't need to. The tragedy wasn't that she had left. The tragedy, Lucas realized as the clock ticked toward 3 a.m., was that she was right. He replayed their final conversation in his head, a loop that haunted him more than the betrayal itself. You don't have a partner, you have a curator. She had tried to rob him, yes, but he had hollowed her out long before she reached for his money. He had treated his marriage like a venture. Capital investment, something to secure, manage, and then ignore while it accrued value. He lay back against the pillows, the silence pressed against his eardrums. In the past, the insomnia had been driven by anxiety, the fear of the unknown, the suspicion of what was happening behind his back. Now the insomnia was different. It was the wakefulness of a man who had eliminated all the variables and found that the result was zero. He closed his eyes, but sleep remained a distant shore he couldn't reach. He thought about Camille, somewhere out there in the world. Maybe she was in a small apartment. Maybe she was sleeping on a cheap mattress. But he had a sinking feeling that she was sleeping soundly, unburdened by the millions he was guarding. Lucas Vance had kept his empire. He had kept his pride. He had exposed the truth. But as the first gray light of dawn began to bleed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, he understood the final line of the ledger. He was the richest man in the room, and there was absolutely no one left to tell.